Salve to your mates, I am Rumus, and today's gaming concept video goes over shops and equipment. Now this is particularly for equipment that you would buy, store, or anything like that. So Resident Evil, even though it's a survival horror game and not necessarily an RPG, has equipment items because that is item box where you store your stuff. Now shops and equipment are very useful as they allow you to upgrade your things, get different items, different colors. Some of them are just purely cosmetic. Another thing I want to talk about with shops and equipment is also special items. So in this game in particular, you have teleporters, which allow you to kind of skate through and kind of have fast travel within a thematic sense in the game. One of the problems that I have with this game is that the teleporters don't go everywhere, and there's still plenty of areas that where you teleport, you still have to traverse a large section of land. So the teleporters, although nice and thematically included, they do become annoying because there's only so much you can do with them before it's sometimes just easier to just kind of just walk around and do your own thing. Like most shops and equipment stores or all kind of things, in different areas you get different items. However, one thing you want to be careful of is that you don't want your shops, and especially a long RPG that's 40-50 plus hours and has a lot of land, to have different items in each one, and they don't automatically include the other ones. One thing that a lot of RPGs do, just to save on time and frustration, is to have all the old items also in the new shops. That way you don't have to go back and traverse for 5 or 7 minutes to go back to an area to get an item that really, it should just be with other shops. Even though thematically it may not make sense, just logistically you want to have the player just continue on with the progress and not have to backtrack for one simple thing. Now if they backtrack for other things, that can be useful. However, it's often just used as an annoyance trick to have it thematically included. Phenotopia is based off of the old Zelda games, which means some of the upgrades are hidden in the world itself and certain challenges or just random hidden areas. And that's perfectly fine to do, and as a matter of fact, I do encourage it because it lets the player investigate, it lets them find treasure, which everybody loves. Why people like pirates so much? I mean, they also do swashbuckling, but who doesn't like finding buried treasure? But what this does, it allows the player to have some sort of purpose for investigating the world, investigating lore, or generally just messing around with the game. The one caveat I would do is the same thing I mentioned before. If you have a puzzle, if you have a cave, a dungeon, whatever, make sure there's a shortcut to get back to it, especially if it's a Metroidvania where you need certain tools, you need certain upgrades, or you need something to unlock another upgrade. That way it's not frustrating when you get all the way done with the cave and then have to go all the way back through it and potentially fight those enemies when they respawn. So basically what you want to do is make it the most efficient as possible. You don't want to have the player just sit around mulling and just kind of angry that they got to go through all this stuff again just for one single item when it should be available at other shops. Having what I call a backwards compatible shop where it includes all the other items or key items from other areas is incredibly important. I originally did my game just like I had it here in Phenotopia, where each shop was unique or had unique items, and then I realized that's really obnoxious, especially since there's 10 or so shops, and so you might actually forget where things are, you have to look them up, and it just gets frustrating when instead it makes more sense to just put a thematic reason why everybody would have it in there. I wrote a reason in so that it would prevent that issue and make it more efficient. So another thing with shops and particularly upgrades is you also want them to increase or change with the game itself. So as your player progresses through the game, you want to increase the requirements of your challenges for upgrades or your shops. The reason you want to do this is so that it doesn't get stale, but these requirements are not always revolving around money or particularly difficulty. Maybe it's a completely different style of puzzle. Maybe this puzzle's just never happened before, and that could be very interesting and mix up the game a good bit. And for shops, increasing complexity does not revolve always around money. Now, increasing the money does help because now the player can only buy 2 or 3 of these items out of the 5 or 6 that are there, so they have to budget. They have to figure out, do I want to increase my health, my attack, my speed, do I want to get a new item or some sort of thing, whatever it is, they have to budget for that, and they're limited in what they can do until they get the money to come back. But what is different and nice is instead of spending money here, maybe you spend on resources. Maybe things that you have to spend on other shops or different areas of the game, you actually spend here, and therefore you're more limited, and you may have to go backtrack and do some certain things to get more of these items. But what it does do is prevent the player from just collecting a bunch of money, save scumming, or generally just grinding to be able to buy whatever they need at the very beginning of the game. And so now I'll talk about the upgrades themselves. Obviously, for upgrades, you don't want them to be overpowered. Some of them can be overpowered, typically when you get them in a new game plus, or beat a certain challenge that obviously you mastered the game, so there's no reason for me to hold you back anymore. I'll just give you God mode, that's fine. And literally in my game, if you 100% the game, there is a God mode. There's one where you don't take damage, you do as max damage as possible, and the reason being is that you've mastered the game. There's no reason that I wouldn't give you this. Basically, I'm giving you the cheat code that you need. And although that can be boring and you want to prevent that in the early stages of the game, what you don't want to prevent is underpowering or overpowering the player. Underpowering can have the opposite effect where it becomes too frustrating. It doesn't seem like the upgrades do anything of importance, so why would I go looking for them when they don't actually do anything? Obviously, this is a very hard thing to balance. Some games get it way wrong, and particularly roguelites, MMOs, often go through multiple iterations of nerfs and balances and buffs to make sure that things are as balanced as possible. Especially when you have a million people playing your game, you obviously aren't going to be able to check everything and everybody's playstyle and all sorts of things, but you generally want to make it as balanced as possible to give the average player that sense of, I'm improving, very slightly, but improving, and these things are worthwhile to get, even though the challenge is twisting my yarn. Another thing with upgrades in particular is you want to make them useful. One of the things to talk about in my mechanics videos is utility. It's nice if something is used for story-based or whatever, but really, if I'm only using it for the story, I'm gonna forget that I have it, and I'm never really gonna use it, especially if it's a combat item. It needs to be useful, and it must have practicality. So if it has a long wind-up, it needs to deliver a lot of power. If it has a long wind-up and doesn't do a lot of power, I would never use it, especially when my DPS for my regular attacks would outshine it. So in this particular game, one of the issues that it has is that the slingshot is useful in the very beginning of the game, but gets outpaced once you get the spear. The spear does more damage, it's faster, it's more accurate. There's no real reason why you would use the slingshot except for puzzles. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that it could have been used or useful in some way if it had a special attack or effect that it did to enemies that the spear doesn't. Along with utility, you also want to focus at frequency for your upgrades and items and resources. Obviously, not everything's going to be used in combat. It's not going to be used in every single continuous gameplay mechanic that you would typically have with like jumping, running, shooting, whatever you would have. If it's a puzzle game, maybe you have a special eye or something, that's fine. But for certain items, upgrades, or powers, or what you want to call them, you need to have them be frequent, otherwise I will forget that I have them, and I will get very frustrated when that brick wall that clearly is hiding a secret, I forget that I have a bomb, because I've only used it twice in the game, and it's been 30 hours later, and I forget how to use it, I forget where it is in my pack, all those sorts of things, and yeah, that's my fault, but at the same time, you should have used this more frequently. This is on you. Obviously, it's your fault. You're the failure here, not me. So in summary, for your shops, upgrades, powers, tools, whatever, you want to make sure they're easily accessible and efficient. You do not want the player to spend hours and hours redoing fights, redoing puzzles, or just generally backtracking, or trying to skip fights and getting frustrated because they're just trying to do one thing and are constantly prevented from it. You want to make sure that the stat changes to the player are actually useful and noticeable so that they actually go out and get them and spend the time to do so and get frustrated by the game, but actually have a reward. You don't want them to be overpowered because obviously I wouldn't get every single one of them because I can just one-shot this T-Rex. Why would I bother fighting more enemies when I already won? For shops, they increase with money or the resources you need to buy them, and for the challenges, they increase in complexity, the puzzles, the enemies, whatever it is that you need to do. And the last thing is frequency and utility. You want all of your upgrades, your items, whatever it is, to be useful, and you also want them to have frequent ability to be used. If they do not appear frequently enough, the player will forget them or just choose not to use them because whatever. But you also want it to be useful because not only did you spend time making this and putting it in the game, but also players will get discouraged from looking for items or challenges if 2 or 3 of the items are duplicates or are just generally not as useful as other items that they already have. But that's it for me. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. If you have any ideas of upgrades that are poorly done, or well done, or very interesting upgrade mechanics or systems in a game, please put them in the comment section so we can continue this discourse. But until next time, Walete Omnes.